Welcome to today's deep dive. As we get started, may God bless your day and your entire week.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for having me.
Of course. So, I want you to imagine something. Imagine walking into your hometown, after years away, and you're actively trying to keep the peace. But within just 7 days, you are somehow the center of a massive riot.
Oh, yeah, a completely chaotic situation.
Right. And you're mistakenly identified as this notorious terrorist, and you're literally strapped down like minutes away from being brutally interrogated by the military.
Which is just a terrifying scenario.
Exactly. But that is exactly where the Apostle Paul finds himself in the 21st and 22nd chapters of the book of Acts. So today we are unpacking the historical, the cultural, and the political mechanisms behind Paul's incredibly dangerous return to Jerusalem.
And we've got a really great stack of sources for this today, too. We're pulling from the Holman commentary, the NAA, and a general biblical commentary to really, dig into the layers of this. Because it's a narrative that forces us to look past the sort of surface level Sunday school version of these events.
Yeah, we're going deep today.
We really are. We're dealing with things like the weaponization of fake news, confirmation bias, the very fragile geopolitical powder keg of first century Judea, and honestly, a total masterclass in strategic rhetoric.
I love that. And underlying all of this action is a really profound through line for you, the listener, to consider, which is, how do you maintain your character and execute your mission when the surrounding culture is just completely determined to mischaracterize you?
It's such a relevant question for today.
It really is. So, okay, let's unpack this. Paul is finishing up his third missionary journey, right? And he's arriving in Jerusalem.
Right. And just to set the scene, the city is a literal pressure cooker.
Yeah, because we're looking at a population of, between 25,000 and 50,000 people?
Exactly. And nationalistic zealotry is just at an all-time high. There's so much tension.
So Paul meets with James and the elders of the church, and they immediately, right off the bat, they drop a massive public relations crisis on his lap.
They do. Because the local Jewish Christians, and we're talking about thousands of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
They are deeply, deeply suspicious of Paul.
Right.
The prevailing rumor that's circulating through Jerusalem is that Paul has become this total religious anarchist. Word on the street is that he is out in the diaspora actively teaching Jewish believers to completely abandon the law of Moses.
Wow.
Yeah, that he's telling them to, stop circumcising their children and just totally forsake their ancestral traditions.
Which is, that's just a complete distortion of his message.
Totally.
He was preaching that the law couldn't justify you before God, only faith in Christ could do that. But he never demanded that Jewish converts strip away their cultural identity.
No, not at all. But, as we know, perception is reality.
Right.
Especially in a politically volatile environment like that.
Yeah.
So, James and the elders, they propose this highly visible, highly traditional countermeasure.
Right, the PR move.
Exactly. They tell Paul, look, you need to sponsor 4 men who are completing a Nazirite vow. And this meant Paul would have to pay for their sacrificial offerings, which were, by the way, pretty expensive.
Yeah, not cheap.
Right. And he'd have to join them in the temple for a 7-day purification period. The whole goal was to basically broadcast to the entire city that Paul still respected the customs and walked in line with the law.
Okay, wait, let's unpack this, because I have to challenge this strategy. On paper, it looks like a massive contradiction.
It definitely does.
Paul is the guy who wrote Galatians. He publicly confronted Peter in Antioch over this exact kind of thing and, pressure to conform to Jewish customs just for the sake of appearances.
Oh, yeah. He called Peter out in front of everybody.
Right. And he spent years bleeding and suffering to establish that Gentile believers do not need the law. And now suddenly he's footing the bill for ancient temple rituals and going through purification rites just to appease this hostile, legalistic crowd. It feels like modern political flip-flopping to win votes.
I totally get that.
Like, if I'm a Gentile convert watching this happen, I'm probably thinking Paul just sold out his core message to save his own skin in Jerusalem.
I see exactly why you draw that conclusion, and honestly, it's a critique Paul himself likely anticipated. But what's fascinating here is the jurisdictional nuance in Paul's theology.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, according to the commentaries we're using, there's a massive difference between compromising on a core truth like how one is saved versus compromising on a cultural custom.
But walk us through that distinction. Because, paying for temple sacrifices, that feels like crossing a theological line, not just a cultural one.
It really comes down to intent and audience. The Jerusalem elders weren't asking Paul to impose the Torah on his Gentile churches, right? The rules from the Jerusalem Council for the Gentiles, those remained absolute.
Okay, so the Gentiles are safe.
Right. What they were asking was for Paul to prove he wasn't an enemy of his own people's heritage. Paul actually lived by a very specific strategic framework. He wrote about it himself. To the Jew, I became like a Jew to win the Jews.
Ah, right. 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Becoming all things to all people.
Precisely. If participating in a Nazirite vow doesn't violate the core truth, which is that salvation is by faith alone, then refusing to do it purely out of, stubborn pride, that would be a failure of love.
Right, that makes sense.
He wasn't relying on those sacrifices to save him. He was utilizing them as a bridge to his brethren. Connect this to our own lives.
Right.
Sometimes true strength is knowing exactly when to bend on non-essentials in order to preserve unity.
That's a really crucial framework to have. So he's navigating this cultural matrix, basically utilizing the system to maintain the peace. But the tragic irony here is that this brilliant, de-escalation tactic is exactly what puts him right in the crosshairs.
It is. It really is.
Because toward the end of those 7 days, a group of Jews from the province of Asia, specifically from Ephesus, actually, they spot him in the temple complex.
And we know from earlier records in Acts that Paul's time in Ephesus was, well, it was incredibly disruptive to the local economy and their religious structure.
Oh, yeah, the whole riot with the silversmiths.
Right. So these men know his face, and they clearly have a deep-seated vendetta against him.
And here is where the fake news and the confirmation bias really gets weaponized, because these men had seen Paul walking around the city earlier in the week with a Gentile associate, this guy named Trophimus the Ephesian.
Right.
And then later on, they see Paul inside the temple courts. Now, they don't actually see Trophimus in the temple with him, but they make this massive, entirely unfounded leap in logic.
It's a huge leap.
It's just like modern-day cancel culture, honestly, where people jump to insane conclusions based on, a single out-of-context photo or a vague tweet. They stitch together 2 disconnected facts. Fact A, Paul associates with Gentiles in the city, plus fact B, Paul is in the temple, and they create this deadly lie. Paul must have smuggled a Gentile into the restricted inner sanctuary.
And that lie is the anatomy of a systemic meltdown. To understand the sheer gravity of this accusation, we really have to look at the architectural and legal layout of the temple.
Let's do that. What did it look like?
So the outermost area was the court of the Gentiles. That was open to anyone. But separating that outer court from the inner courts, the court of Israel, was a literal stone barrier called the soreg.
Okay.
And along this wall were large stone tablets inscribed in Greek and Latin. And these signs were literal death penalty warnings. They stated that any foreigner who crossed that boundary would be personally responsible for their own subsequent death.
Wow, so it was a literal authorized kill zone? And what's crazy is that the Romans, who usually stripped occupied nations of the right to execute people, they actually allowed the Jewish authorities to enforce the death penalty for this one specific infraction, even if the trespasser was a Roman citizen.
Right, it was a major geopolitical concession just to keep the peace in Judea. So accusing Paul of breaching that wall wasn't just some theological debate. It was an accusation of a capital offense that threatened the very fragile treaty between Rome and the Sanhedrin.
Which is insane because Paul, with his elite Pharisaic training, he fully understood the law. He would never have brought Trophimus past that marker.
No, of course not.
Like, he wasn't suicidal.
Yeah.
But the mob didn't care about facts. They were reacting entirely to a manufactured reputation.
And commentary makes a great point here. Character is who you are. Reputation is what people think you are. The mob was reacting to a fake reputation.
It's a terrifying phenomenon when an echo chamber becomes so loud that your actual character is completely eclipsed by a false narrative.
It really is.
So, the text notes the entire city was roused. It's a massive temple riot. They seize Paul, they drag him out of the inner sanctuary, and immediately the Levites and the temple guards just slam the massive doors shut.
Which, if you think about it, is a profoundly dark, ironic detail.
How so?
Well, the guards shut the doors to frantically ensure the inner sanctuary remains ritually pure, right? They don't want blood spilling on holy ground. But they're completely unbothered by the fact that a man is about to be illegally lynched on the pavement just outside.
Wow.
They literally prioritize architectural holiness over human life.
That's chilling. So outside the doors, the brutal beating begins. The mob is actively trying to beat Paul to death. But the geography of the Temple Mount is what shifts the narrative here.
Right, the Romans enter the picture.
Exactly. Sitting on the northwest corner, towering over the temple courts, is the Antonia Fortress. That's the Roman military garrison. And the Roman commander of the troops, a guy named Claudius Lysias, he sees the riot erupting from high above.
So he immediately deploys a massive military response. He rushes down the 2 flights of stairs with a whole legion of soldiers and centurions.
I have to point out the irony here. It's the pagan, secular, occupying Roman military that ends up acting as the instrument of rescue for the great Christian apostle. They save him from his own religious community.
The irony is very thick, but, we should clarify, Claudius Lysias isn't stepping in out of a sense of pure justice or anything.
Right.
He's stepping in to maintain the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. He sees the mob stop beating Paul when they see the armor, and he just assumes the man at the center of this riot must be a criminal, right? The cause of all this chaos.
Right. So he immediately orders Paul to be bound. The soldiers chain him to 2 guards. And the commander tries to get a straight answer from the crowd about what he did, but the noise is just deafening.
Totally chaos.
The mob is surging. They're screaming, "Kill him! Kill him!" Which, by the way, carries this eerie, unmistakable echo of the trial of Jesus years earlier.
Oh, absolutely.
And the violence is so intense that when they reach the steps of the fortress, the soldiers literally have to carry Paul up the stairs to protect him from the crush of the mob.
And it's right here, suspended on the stairs between the fury of the temple and the fortress, that the mix-up happens. The assumptions about Paul completely unravel.
Yes, because right as they're about to drag him inside, Paul turns to the Roman commander and speaks to him in fluent Greek. And the commander is just floored. He's essentially like, "Wait, you speak Greek?"
This raises an important question, though. Why was he so shocked? And this reveals the threat matrix the Roman commander was operating under. Claudius Lysias had already profiled Paul. He looked at the riot, he looked at the prisoner, and he assumed he had just captured the notorious Egyptian.
This is one of my favorite historical details in the narrative.
It really grounds the story in recorded history. The commentaries point out that we know from this historian Josephus about this Egyptian false prophet. He had recently led a massive faction of the Sicaria, which translates to the men of the dagger or the assassins. These were extreme guerrilla fighters. And this Egyptian had marched a force of 4,000 of them into the desert to launch a revolt.
Wow.
The Roman military crushed the uprising, but the leader himself vanished.
So Lysias is thinking, I finally caught the region's most wanted terrorist, and he's returned to spark a rebellion. But finding out Paul is actually a highly educated man from Tarsus, which was an important city in Cilicia, it completely flips the script.
It dismantles his whole theory.
Yeah. And this highlights Paul's incredible resilience. I mean, think about it. He's bleeding, he's chained, he was just rescued from a lynching.
Yeah.
The natural human response is self-preservation, right? Like, get me a doctor, get me inside, or at least demand revenge on the mob.
Right.
But instead, he doesn't ask for any of that. He asks for permission to preach to the mob that just tried to kill him.
Which is just astounding. It requires an almost incomprehensible level of mission clarity.
So the commander, who's probably super bewildered at this point, he grants permission. Paul stands on the stairs, motions with his hand, and he doesn't speak Greek. He switches to Aramaic, or Hebrew, the vernacular of the crowd.
And the psychological effect is instantaneous.
Yeah.
The text says a great silence falls over them.
It's a masterful defense. I compare it to, like, a brilliant legal defense or a master class in reading a room. He doesn't start with heavy theology. He drops his resume to build immediate credibility.
Right, he builds that bridge.
He tells them, look, I am a Jew raised right here in Jerusalem. I was taught by the ultra-strict Rabbi Gamaliel.
Which is huge. Gamaliel was a towering figure of authority. By invoking him, Paul is proving his understanding of the law is elite.
And he goes further. He aligns himself with their rage. He says, I used to be a violent persecutor of the Christians too. I even guarded the coats when Stephen was stoned. He's basically saying, I understand your zeal because I lived it.
And then, when he unpacks his testimony of his Damascus Road conversion, notice how strategically he speaks to this specific Jewish audience. When mentioning his baptism, Paul emphasizes that Ananias, the man who prayed for his sight to return, he introduces him not as a Christian leader, but as a devout Jew who strictly observed the law and was respected by all.
That's a great point. He's proving that his initiation into this faith was guided by a paragon of Jewish orthodoxy.
Exactly. And the sources explain the theology of baptism mentioned here, too. It's important to note that the physical act of the water doesn't cleanse sins. Rather, it is an outward symbol of the purification that comes through faith in Jesus. Paul is layering all of this incredibly carefully.
Right, and the crowd is tracking with him. They're listening raptly. The silence holds until Paul drops one single trigger word.
One word.
He recounts a vision in the temple where God told him to leave Jerusalem, and Paul says God told him, "Go, I will send you far away to the Gentiles."
That's it.
The word Gentiles, that single word, acts as a detonator. The crowd just completely loses its mind. They erupt, they start throwing dust in the air, tearing their clothes, and screaming that he doesn't deserve to live.
Such a visceral reaction.
Why? Why does that one word shatter everything so violently?
Well, because it struck at the very core of their socio-political identity. Under the crushing weight of Roman occupation, their primary comfort was their exclusive covenant with God. The idea that God was going to bypass Jerusalem and offer equal grace directly to the unclean Gentile world, it felt like a betrayal of their national survival.
Wow, so it was a threat to their exceptionalism.
Completely.
So meanwhile, the Roman commander is watching this whole thing, but since he doesn't understand Aramaic, he has no idea what Paul just said. All he sees is that whatever this guy just uttered, it caused the riot to reignite.
So he assumes Paul must be a horrible criminal holding something back.
Right. So Lysias orders Paul brought into the fortress to be interrogated under the lash. He orders him to be flogged.
And we have to be clear, this wasn't a standard whipping. The Roman scourge was a lethal instrument designed to break bones and strip flesh.
Right. It was horrific. So they drag him inside. The soldiers are tying him down with leather straps, stretching him out. And Paul, in what has to be one of the calmest moments in history, just looks at the centurion and asks, "Is it legal for you to flog a Roman citizen who hasn't even been found guilty?"
The ultimate trump card.
But I have to ask you, why wait until he's literally strapped down to reveal this? Like, why didn't he scream, "I'm a Roman," while the Jewish mob was beating him in the courtyard?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it perfectly illustrates his situational awareness.
Oh.
Out on the temple courts, a zealous religious mob doesn't care about Roman citizenship laws. They cared about temple purity. Claiming it there wouldn't have saved him.
Okay, that makes sense.
But inside the fortress, he's dealing exclusively with the mechanics of the Roman legal system. And the value of Roman citizenship was extreme. To claim it falsely was punishable by death. So when he says it, it freezes the machinery. The centurion panics, runs to the commander, and the commander comes running in.
Right. And Lysias admits he had to pay a massive bribe, a lot of money, just to get his citizenship.
And then Paul just flexes on him, basically. He says, "But I was born a citizen."
It's so good.
It establishes an undeniable hierarchy. But it also shows how Paul perfectly demonstrates how to be a citizen of heaven and a good citizen of earth. He uses his legal rights not just to save his skin, but to ensure the survival of his mission. By surviving here, he eventually takes the gospel all the way to Rome.
It really is tactical brilliance. Well, we have covered incredible ground today, but before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder based on the commentary.
Oh, I'd love to hear it.
Think about Paul's friends back in Tyre and Caesarea. Earlier in Acts, they actually begged him not to go to Jerusalem because they knew he would suffer. They wept over it. And we often think that if we are facing intense hardship or severe opposition, it must mean we are out of God's will or that we made a wrong turn somewhere.
Right, that's a very common human reaction.
Exactly. But what if, like Paul, your greatest moments of impact actually require you to walk straight into the storm? Just something to think about this week.
That's a powerful thought to leave on.
Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey today. Remember, God blesses all of you. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.